Hey there, students. Tom Ritchie here, and we are beginning another Corona class. All right. So as far as that, we got another Corona class for AP European History. And in this session, we are going to be focusing on Napoleon. Now, I've got a few things here. Steve, my neighborhood pool is still closed. The dictator of South Carolina has not opened up my neighborhood pool. Just got another email about that, about public pools being closed. And it's like, this is private property, people. What am I drinking? I've actually got water right now, and I've got my Six the Musical mug here. When Broadway opens back up, y'all should go check that out. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, focus is going to be on Napoleon today. I have got a brand new DBQ I want to share with y'all. Okay, so I think I may have shared, I don't know, did I share this with some people already? But I'm going to go ahead and put this in the chat so that y'all have got access to this DBQ. So we've got here the Napoleon DBQ is going into the chat. Okay, those of you on YouTube, Devin just called me the Emperor of AP Euro. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share it on the YouTube chat as well. Okay, so if you want access to the Napoleon DBQ, there it is. And Lucy, I love Six as well. I'm not typically a big fan of musicals, but I thought it was great. So as far as this goes, ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead and focus on Napoleon today. Now, also, I'm going to be emailing y'all pretty soon about some premium sessions the next 2 Saturday afternoons where we're going to break down some DBQs. Okay, so we're going to break down some DBQs. Those are going to be created. Look out for those. I'm going to create those on Crowdcast. Y'all are going to be able to register for those. That's going to be $15, and it's going to cover 2 Saturday afternoon broadcasts. Okay, so be sure to just keep an eye open for that. I'm going to get those out there today. All right, so that will happen today, and we will be having some premium broadcasts on the next 2 Saturdays where we're going to be going over these DBQs. And those of you in the Crowdcast, remind me, I've got a little story to read at the end of this broadcast. I want to read a story. I just got a book in that I'm really excited about. Okay, so as far as that goes, James, I'm not sure if I saw your email or not. So why did Napoleon decide to overthrow the Directory? Okay, so as far as overthrowing the Directory, that is one of the things that we really don't need to answer per se for the AP European History exam. And one thing I will say here is thank you, AJ, for waking up to this. Now, for this or whatever. Now, one thing we would note is what we want to focus on about Napoleon is that he did overthrow the Directory. Okay, so we want to understand that Napoleon's beginning a new phase of the French Revolution. We want to understand what's happening. Now, the Directory is really the phase of the French Revolution that we need to know the least about. Okay, that there was a 5-man executive committee. At some point, I will put out a video on the Directory, but it's not, as far as importance, you don't need to know a lot about it. And I refer to the Directory as kind of a cooling off period because they're still using the Republican calendar. Christianity is still technically illegal, but people are going back into the churches and putting their Catholic stuff back in there, and nobody is sending them to the guillotine. So the Directory is really just kind of a tepid sort of like, I mean, it's very hard to get into. And so I would tell like AP Euro students, don't worry about the Directory. It's that 5 years between the Reign of Terror and Napoleon's coup. So basically, Napoleon was part of a political faction that included Abbé Sieyès and some others who believed that the Directory needed to be overthrown. So it's not quite as important why that happened as being able to explain things like the Concordat, the Continental System, and the Napoleonic Code. Like those would be your big 3 that I would be thinking about getting into. Okay, so the Concordat, the Continental System, and I would say the Code of Laws. If we see the 3 C's, check that out. So Concordat is first of all. Then I said, what was the, oh my God, Continental System and Code. Okay, so we think about that: Concordat, Continental System, Code. Those are the three C's of Napoleon, all right? Concordat, Continental System, and Code. You should have a notebook where you're writing some things down on paper. Concordat, Continental System, Code. All right. So with that, we want to kind of get into that. So explain the rise of Napoleon. Okay, Vivicki's here. It's always so good to see you, Vivicki. And so the rise of Napoleon. This is something that's kind of interesting when you think about Napoleon as a child of the French Revolution per se. That Napoleon was born into nobility, but remember, being born into nobility in France, there were tons of like less significant nobles. Now, the other thing about Napoleon is that he was actually Corsican. Okay, now France had annexed Corsica like just a few years before Napoleon was born. So in a lot of ways, what we want to think about is Napoleon was barely French, okay? That he was actually from an outlying island that had not been part of France until right before he was born. So Napoleon always spoke French with a Corsican accent. So the thing is, that's really one of the most amazing things about Napoleon is where he came from. Under the old regime, Napoleon probably would have climbed up maybe to the height of like maybe an artillery captain or something like that. He would have never been able to get into the highest officer ranks that were reserved for the higher actual French nobility. So when we're thinking about Napoleon, we want to understand that this is not somebody who would have risen that far in the old regime. So provincial nobility, minor nobility, and someone who would have only gone so far. Now, Napoleon began to get politically active. So in the 1790s, Napoleon was was basically in the military and also got active in the Jacobin Club, somebody who's very politically astute. Now, another thing that Napoleon did is he became someone that the leaders could depend on. Okay, so Napoleon, the whole thing about the whiff of grape shot, we always hear about I gave him a whiff of grape shot. Napoleon was someone who would keep order. He was willing to go out there and disperse a crowd of monarchists during the time of the monarchy. Okay, so Napoleon, let's see, the 13th. Yeah, so as far as that goes, that was just to kind of note here. Let me just show you this, this situation here, Vivicki. So going into that. So the 13th of Vendemiaire. Now, 13th Vendemiaire, year 4. So notice, as I said here, that you had that this was, this is the French Republican calendar, year 4, 13 Vendemiaire. The French Republican calendar continued to be used into some years in Napoleon's empire. Once Napoleon proclaimed the empire, one of the things he did was he got rid of the Republican calendar. So as far as that goes, Napoleon actually had a role in the directory, taking power. Okay, so this is in 1795, a little bit after the fall of Robespierre. And so basically you see here where, wow, I mean, this is French royalists with 30,000. Okay, so Napoleon's got only 4,500 regular troops. I mean, this was a very big royalist revolt. And so Napoleon's got about 6,000, but he's got 40 cannon. Okay, so that's where this is Napoleon's role as an artillery officer. And so we see here that here's another army calling themselves the Catholic and Royal Army. This kind of goes back, if any of y'all are familiar with the war in the Vendée. Okay, so we see here a noise which has become a rallying cry in the Vendée. This sounds very interesting. This is something I actually want to know a little more about here. So basically, this is something like they're using the owl's cry. This is how the insurgents in the Vendée. But when you see the Catholic and Royal Army, so these are people who want to bring back the monarchy and overthrow the French Republic. So you see here where Napoleon has this role in putting down this royalist mob. Okay, so there is a depiction of Napoleon and his troops giving these royalists a whiff of grape shot. I mean, just throwing out, throwing out cannon fire out there and dispersing this royalist mob. Okay, so that's something which is kind of interesting when you think about it, that Napoleon really enters the scene as somebody who is a tool of repression by the Directory. Okay, like when you see the Directory putting down this royalist insurgency. But then again, Napoleon is somebody who is saying, I don't want to bring back the monarchy. Okay, so when we think about that, Napoleon continues to rise up in the ranks and begins making political contacts with people like Abbe Sieyès, and then Napoleon ends up overthrowing the Directory and begins what is known as the Consulate, okay, where Napoleon, from 1799 to 1804, for 5 years, Napoleon is first consul. Now, in 1804, he proclaims himself emperor, okay? So the Thermidorian reaction was the overthrow of Robespierre. That was the fall of Robespierre. So how did Napoleon's rule? Okay, Emily, you've got a great question here. Always such a pleasure to see you out there in Tallahassee, Florida. And so with that, I almost wore my Tallahassee shirt since I've got Napoleon on it. I thought about wearing my Florida State University High School AP Euro shirt. I really should have. And so how did Napoleon's rule affect women? Now, a couple of things here, because one thing we didn't know, we need to be a little nuanced about this, okay? So, for example, like during the Reign of Terror, like the Radical Revolution, you saw laws passed that gave women the right to a no-fault divorce. Now, no-fault divorce is something that's very common today. It's really kind of a hallmark of Western society. If a woman wants to get divorced, if a man wants to get divorced, they don't need a reason to do so. Okay, so when you look at, I'm not in Florida, I am in South Carolina, Clemson, South Carolina. So the thing is, when we think about no-fault divorce, that's something. Now, the Catholic Church, you think about the old regime. The Catholic Church still, even today, does not recognize divorce as valid. So, so as far as that goes, they don't recognize the divorce as valid. But during the Reign of Terror, you see de-Christianization, and they decide, you know what, let's have no-fault divorce for men and women. Like a woman could have an equal right to sue for divorce. Now, the Napoleonic Code restricted the rights of women to sue for a divorce. Essentially, the only grounds that a woman would have to sue for divorce under the Napoleonic Code was if her husband had brought his mistress into the house and had shamed her. Like basically the husband has got, like, adultery in and of itself was not cause for a woman to file for divorce, only if the man had publicly embarrassed her with his extramarital affairs. Now, here's where we have to kind of put this into perspective, because on one hand, Napoleon undid something that was done by the revolutionary government during the Reign of Terror. But on the other hand, the Napoleonic Code was not any more repressive than any other law code at the time toward women. So that's the other side. Like, we don't want to look at Napoleon as like just a flagrant misogynist, but somebody who is looking at some of these things that were passed during the Reign of Terror and bringing it back a little bit, okay? Because, not quite to the extent of the old regime, but one of the things that Napoleon believed was like a lot of people at that time. Now, of course, today, like I said, no-fault divorce is just part of our culture. But at that time, the idea of no-fault divorce, people thought, well, that will threaten the family. Okay, that's going to threaten the institution of the family. So in some ways, Napoleon was somewhat conservative. In some ways, Napoleon was somewhat liberal. In all ways, Napoleon was very nationalist. So can I explain the Bourbon Restoration? Okay, so when we think about this, now, the transition to elected monarchs. I don't think we're going to see a transition to, wait, where'd that go? Okay. So we're not going to see, Elena, a transition to elected monarchs per se. But what you're seeing with the Bourbon Restoration, okay, what we see is Louis the 18th, who is a Bourbon monarch, the one who claimed the throne on the legitimate line, that Louis the 18th comes in as the King of France. Not king of the French, but old-fashioned King of France. Now, one thing we want to note about the Bourbon Restoration, we want to make clear that it was a constitutional monarchy, okay? So it wasn't an absolute monarchy. There actually was a representative body that consulted with the king and had some power, even though the king did have a lot of power. It was not an absolute monarchy. Now, what happens here is the Bourbons are restored, but here's the thing. The Bourbons were restored by people from other countries, by foreign powers. Basically, the first time that Napoleon went into exile, that, he surrendered, and then the great powers came into Paris with the Quadruple Alliance, and they said, okay, we're going to restore the Bourbons. And the Bourbons got rid of the tricolor flag. So it's like you have a Bourbon monarch, you have the fleur-de-lis again instead of the tricolor flag. And so when Napoleon gets off of Elba, he makes a proclamation to the French people and says that your emperor has returned. One thing about Napoleon is that he was very good, even though Napoleon did have, some semblance of dictatorial power. I mean, this is a man who wielded a lot of personal power, but he never forgot where that personal power came from. It's kind of like if you think in terms of, right now, my governor's wielding dictatorial power. It's like my neighborhood pool, which is not a public pool. It's a privately owned pool, is still closed. But the thing is, you ask the majority of South Carolinians, right now, the majority of South Carolinians approve of the repressive measures that our government is taking in the current state of emergency. I don't. That's me personally. But at the same time, Henry McMaster, the dictator of South Carolina, I mean, he is acting in a way that goes along with the majority of the people of South Carolina. So, even though I may believe that my governor is acting as a dictator, I want to swim. Chlorine kills germs, and it's possible to, have a neighborhood pool with social distancing and all that kind of stuff. I'm not a child. I'm an American. I'm a free person. We don't see the response in most states to the coronavirus is not guided by liberalism. Okay, it's not guided by classical liberalism. It is guided by an authoritarianism that is supported by the majority of the people right now. And so, again, this coronavirus, the general will. So when we think about this, this idea of how would people tolerate a dictatorship? People are tolerating a dictatorship right now, basically. I mean, this is, and again, this is me. I'm not telling anybody to break the law. I'm not telling anybody to go stand 1.5 feet away from somebody or anything like that. Oh, nice to see you, Tallow, from Instagram. But I'm just saying, and I'm expressing my personal opinion as someone who has a lot of sympathies with classical liberalism. Lucia, I would love to talk to you about utilitarianism. John Stuart Mill says utilitarianism, the greatest good for the greatest number, happens when people are free. And so it would be very interesting here to get into utilitarianism and thinking about this coronavirus thing, but that's not the purpose of this class. I digress a little bit, okay? So as far as that goes, that the 100 days, Napoleon comes back and reestablishes himself as the ruler of France because he has the support of the French people. Okay, so as far as that goes, but so you could say that, but then again, by this same standard, we could say that Napoleon was democratic. Okay, so when you think about this, that Napoleon, it makes you look at Napoleon a whole different way because his rule was supported by the vast majority of French people supported his rule because he gave them a stability that that was not there before. So as far as that goes, you've got the 100 days, then Napoleon is exiled now to St. Helena. And that is the end of the Napoleonic period. And so you've got the Bourbon Restoration. Now, the Bourbon Restoration, that's not elected monarchs. Those are the Bourbons. What you might be getting into, Alina, is the French Revolution of 1830, where you see a new king, you see a new king, Louis Philippe, the so-called citizen king. So in the French Revolution of 1830, Louis Philippe, the citizen king, he brought back the French tricolor, for example. So he said, I'm the king of France, but actually, no, wait, back up. He said, not I'm the king of France, but I'm the king of the French. So he called himself king of the French, and he brought back the French tricolor flag. So that's something that, we see here. But yeah, France doesn't go to an elected monarchy, but they do establish another monarchy with Louis Philippe in 1830. Okay. So that is, yeah. So the thing is, yes, James, the guillotine and the mass executions of enemies of the people, that's pretty much done after the Reign of Terror. Now, one thing to note here is that the guillotine continued to be the method of capital punishment in France all the way through the 1970s, when capital punishment was finally outlawed in France. So the guillotine, there was a guy in the 1970s, they called him the pimp killer. Not because he was killing pimps, he posed as a pimp and he was killing prostitutes, and he was found guilty, and he was executed by the guillotine. So the French continued to use the guillotine as their standard method of execution all the way until they got rid of capital punishment. So, as far as that goes, but yes, the mass executions did stop after the Reign of Terror. All right, so as far as that goes, Emily is asking here, and I think that we could ask the same questions about Bismarck. Was Napoleon a conservative or, political force? And one thing we want to understand about the DDQ I've shared with y'all is that Napoleon, just like anything else in history, is open to interpretation. So when you think about this, there are things that Napoleon's doing. Now, for example, let's look at the 3 C's, okay, or at least 2 of the C's. Let's look at the Concordat and the Code, all right? And so when we look at the Concordat, we could say that the Concordat was conservative because it's bringing back the Catholic Church, okay? We could say that the Concordat was conservative because he's bringing back the Catholic Church. But at the same time, he's not bringing back the Catholic Church the same way. He's bringing back the Catholic Church not as the state religion, but as the majority religion. Okay, so Napoleon is bringing this back as the majority religion, not as a state religion. Okay, so that's something that I think is extremely important. We're thinking about Napoleon as as bringing this back as the religion of the majority. Also, he's upholding the right of all French people to practice whatever religion they want. So in a sense, we see that the Concordat could be interpreted as conservative because it's bringing back the Catholic Church into a position of prominence. But we can also say that that is liberal, because when we think about a liberal kind of idea, that Napoleon, for the first time under Napoleon, France really has like full religious toleration. So Napoleon's actually, in a lot of cases, referred to as an enlightened absolutist. Typically, we think about Frederick the Great, Catherine the Great, Joseph II. But Napoleon, there are a lot of principles of the Enlightenment that are present in Napoleon's policies. Now, also, we can look at the Concordat as partly nationalist, because we think about not necessarily the Catholic Church as a state religion in France, but as a national religion. That this is the French national religion. Napoleon's like, look, France is Catholic. That is a reality that we're not going to get around. Okay, France is Catholic. That is just the case. And so when we're looking at this here, we can categorize Napoleon all kinds of different ways. Now, the Napoleonic Code, we could say that the Napoleonic Code is liberal because you have equal justice under the law. Like, everybody is treated the same under the law. That is something that is a liberal idea. But also there are things in the Napoleonic Code that are conservative. So such as, going back to making it difficult for a woman to sue for divorce, okay, against her husband. Now, also, there are probably restrictions against men, as well, but I'm not as familiar with them. Now, the other thing is we want to think about the Napoleonic Code as nationalist, because this is, for the first time, France has a has a national code of laws that applies in a uniform way throughout France. So at once, the Napoleonic Code is conservative, liberal, and nationalist. Now, going into this, Victoria, you're asking about questions. I'm simulcasting this on YouTube. I'm looking at the YouTube chat once in a while, but as far as that goes, I mention the Jesuits sometimes. Okay, Jesus Christ, my King, never hears me mention the Jesuits, but I do have them. They actually show up in my Enlightened Absolutism DBQ. So as far as that, if you are an AP Euro student, you want to join us on Crowdcast, that's where I'm taking the questions. So as far as that, is it true Napoleon got punched in the face during the coup d'etat? I don't know, but I can tell you, not on the exam. That does sound interesting. Okay, so did Napoleon let's see here. Napoleon stormed into the chambers and proved this coup to be a coup within a coup. Let's see. So, yeah, I'm not sure about that. I don't see anything about that. So that's kind of interesting. So yeah, I'm not sure how that what exactly went down. That's a great question though. It certainly got a lot of interest, but not on the exam. Now, can Napoleon be considered absolutist? Okay, so if we think about this, is he absolutist? Now, for one thing, we would note that Napoleon certainly isn't a fan of divine right absolutism. Okay, so first of all, not divine right absolutism. Now, he wielded power similar to an absolutist, but at the same time, we want to note that Napoleon, in proclaiming himself emperor, he had a plebiscite. Okay, I'll go ahead and spell this. Plebiscites. So the plebiscites, basically, these were elections, like when Napoleon put a new constitution in front of the French. Okay, so we think about that, the Constitution of Napoleonic France. Okay. Now, one thing that we want to note here is that this is something that Napoleon, so, when we see December of 1799, we're going to see the Constitution of the year 8. Okay. Now, the thing is, there's a constitution technically. So, for some people, and this is where the debate gets in. Some people say that Napoleon completed the French Revolution. Some people would say that, Napoleon, ended the French Revolution. So it depends on how you interpret the French Revolution. So as far as that goes, we're thinking in terms of what he an absolutist, but he also recognized that he got his power from the people. Okay, so he relied on the support of the French people to uphold his regime. So that's something I think is important here when we think about Napoleon. That sure, there are aspects that are absolutist, but at the same time, he was a man of the people and recognized his power came from the people. Okay, so as far as that goes, although Great Britain was a major threat to France due to its large naval strength. Now, Shivham, its large naval strength would have ITS, no apostrophe. By putting an apostrophe in its, you are saying it is. Okay, so you're saying in France due to it is large naval strength, which doesn't make any sense. So with that, would a British invasion on Napoleon's massive empire really have brought it down? No. As far as that goes, here's the thing. When we think about the others, oh, excellent. The primary when we think about this, the primary intention of the Continental System. So let's think about this. Now, it's not that Napoleon was afraid of a British invasion. Now, the British really, as far as their land forces, they were only going to be effective against Napoleon when allied with other Europeans. So you think about the Quadruple Alliance, these 4 other great powers that weren't France: Britain, Austria, Prussia, and Russia. So Britain combined with the other great powers. This was a formidable army, but Britain had really no position where Britain could come in and unilaterally invade Europe. So this is the standstill, okay? So when we start to think about the Continental System, Napoleon's navy had lost to the British twice, to Admiral Lord Nelson, first at the Battle of the Nile, and then at the Battle of Trafalgar, okay? So the Battle of the Nile, the Battle of Trafalgar. And so the French Navy had been beaten by the British. And so since he had not been able to defeat the Royal Navy, so since Napoleon had been unable to defeat the Royal Navy, what he's not going to be able to do, okay, what he's not going to be able to do is to invade Britain. So the question was never, is Britain going to invade Europe and topple Napoleon, even though Wellington was the commander-in-chief of this army that defeated Napoleon at Waterloo. It was only partly British, okay? So as far as that goes, that's not the concern. The concern is, can Napoleon invade Britain? And without, as long as the British maintain naval superiority, Napoleon couldn't invade. So Napoleon comes up with the Continental System. And the Continental System is a system by which Napoleon is trying to get all of his allies on the continent. Basically, there's a period from about 1806 to 1811, around that time, plus or minus, where Napoleon has subdued basically all of the European powers. He has subdued or allied with them. So they make an agreement. The whole point of the Continental System is basically a trade embargo against Britain. And so the European continental powers are agreeing not to. So great. Jonathan, glad you enjoyed that video on Marco Learning's channel, okay? So the Continental System, okay? So when we're thinking about the Continental System, don't trade with the British, okay? Don't trade with the British, and, we're going to be fine. Now, the invasion of Russia, what we want to understand here is Napoleon's invasion of Russia. It was not to try to conquer Russia. One of the things that shocked Napoleon is when he got to Russia, he was in Russian territory with over 500,000 men, and the Tsar of Russia had not sent a delegation to come to peace terms. So he thought that as soon as he was on Russian soil, that Alexander I would say that, let's have a discussion, let's make peace. And so he didn't do that. Napoleon's army got destroyed, not so much by battle, even though the Battle of Borodino was the largest single-day battle of the Napoleonic Wars, but Napoleon is just basically cut off from his supply lines. He's being harassed on the way back by the Russians, and he comes back into Europe with just a fraction of what he went into Russia with. So with that, we want to, the Continental System was a failed attempt because Russia started trading with the British again. It was to try to bring the British to heel through economic warfare. Okay, so that was the primary intention. So again, Shivam, I think I have given you that as well. So when we think about a basic timeline of Napoleon, okay, so when we think about Napoleon, let me go in here and I will get something together for you, and we'll get into that. Okay, so going from there. We are going to, let's see, so we're going to go into AP Euro and Napoleon timeline. Okay, so let's go ahead and just kind of a rough timeline of Napoleon. I think that's a great idea. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into this here. All right, so I'm trying to share. Okay, let's see here. Let me see what happens if I refresh this. And if it, what? Uh-oh. All right. Am I still coming through okay? Hopefully I am. Okay. So let's see what we've got here. Hey, Money Matt. Good to see you. Not even an AP Euro. Glad to see you here. All right. So as far as that goes, I'm trying to, yeah, it's not, my Google document is not wanting to cooperate here. All right. So Okay, so a Napoleon timeline, and we're going to share, and let's go ahead and copy the link, and we will, people, let's see, only people can open the link. Let's see, got it. And let's see, I just need to note here. Okay, so only people with the link, and I need to note, now what's it doing there? Okay, so I'm trying to, let's see, anyone with the link can view. Okay, all right, got it. So we're going to go ahead and copy that, and we'll go ahead and put that in our chats here in Crowdcast and on YouTube. Okay, so here is we're going to make a timeline on Google Docs. Okay, so as far as that goes, let's go ahead and get into this. All right. Is it Napoleon Dynamite? Ah, ha, ha. That's funny. All right. So going into this, let's go into a rough timeline of Napoleon. Copy that, Houston. All right. So with that, let's go ahead and get into this. All right. So, So timeline of Napoleonic France. Okay. So timeline of Napoleonic France. Now, we want to think about this going into, first of all, we get into, first of all, we see 1795, so let's go ahead and just get some context. 1794 to 1799, we have, of course, the Reign of Terror. Okay, and then 1793 to 1794. Disregard that. And then 1795 to 1799, we have the Directory. Okay, so now during the Reign of Terror, okay, Napoleon always kind of knew where to put himself into places. So we want to note here that Napoleon, became politically active. Okay, so active in Jacobin clubs. Okay, and making sure I've got my timing right. Okay. Okay, so Napoleon, just to make sure I'm not giving, so this is like building some context. Okay, so he supported the Jacobin movement, organizing clubs. So we see here that, he's basically very early on. He was part of, very active in Jacobin clubs. Okay, and so going from there, politically active in Jacobin clubs, from the early stages of the revolution. Okay, so so basically we're going to note here, politically active in Jacobin clubs since the early stages of the revolution. So Napoleon is already thinking in terms of, he was a supporter of the French Republic. Like, remember that the Jacobins did not favor a constitutional monarchy. The Jacobins favored, a republic. So we see here the Directory. Okay, so we see here the Directory, and of course that was in 1795. Okay, that Napoleon put down a royalist insurrection. Okay, so a royalist insurrection, giving them a whiff of grape shot. Okay, and that's basically, grape shot is when you put it into a cannon that basically makes the cannon into a shotgun. Okay, so it's like bam, like just imagine a bunch of huge shotguns firing into the crowd, and that disperses them. Okay, so basically Napoleon became, like, he earned the trust of the Directory, and that's one thing that we would note here. He earned the trust of the Directory. The Directory, a government that he would later overthrow. Okay, so as far as that goes, we want to note here that we've got from 1799 to 1804 is Napoleon's consulate. Okay, so Napoleon's consulate. Okay, so Napoleon's consulate. So when we look at 1799 to 1804, of course, 1799, Napoleon overthrows, so basically overthrew the Directory, okay, and established himself as the head of the government, as first consul. Okay, so first consul. Now, so that's basically Napoleon's consulate. Okay, so now as far as the date on the Napoleonic Code, now, of course, the Concordat, one thing we would note here about the consulate is the Concordat was was enacted in 1801. Okay, so we want to make sure that we've got one of the C's, 1801, that the Concordat of 1801, reestablished, so brought back. I don't know if I want to say established, but in some ways, yes. Okay, so reestablished the Catholic Church in France. Okay, so the Catholic Church in France proclaiming Catholicism to be the majority religion. Okay, now what we want to note here is that, first of all, okay, what we want to note about the Concordat, that we could look at this as conservative, liberal, nationalist, depending on how we interpret it. Okay, so for one thing, we're going to note here that Napoleon, so Napoleon got to have a hand in appointing French bishops. Remember, this is something we know as investiture. Okay, so investiture, this is something that monarchs had been wanting for a long time. So Napoleon had negotiated with the Catholic Church in order to basically give himself more power than French monarchs had previously had. So, the French monarchs before the revolution did not have the power of investiture. Also, we're going to note here that there was religious toleration. Okay, so religious toleration for non-Catholics. Okay, so basically we see here where we see something as liberal. Okay, so we see some things that are nationalist, we see some things that are liberal, we see some things that are conservative. But we want to make sure that we understand the Concordat of 1801. Now, then we go to Napoleon's empire. Okay, so 1804 to 1814 and 15. Okay, so 1815. Okay, so because it comes back very briefly, right? So 1804 to 1814, then 15. Now, this is, of course, Napoleon's, so the first French Empire. So that is Napoleon's empire, where Napoleon is proclaiming himself emperor. So, now we would note here the Constitution of 1804. So when we note the Constitution of the year 12, or the Constitution of 1804, this is something that was adopted, and also, so what we're seeing here, it established the first French Empire. And so looking at this, when we look at the Constitution, we also see that this was something that was as far as that, let's see, First French Republic adopted during the year. All right, so it amended the Constitution and, so establishing the first French Empire. So with that, he's getting wide-ranging powers, okay? So the Constitution established the House of Bonaparte as France's imperial dynasty, making it a hereditary throne that he can pass to his son. So with that, we see that to his family, and the Constitution also. So I don't know if it necessarily restricted it to sons, but with that, we see here that is something. Now we see Plebiscite, Napoleon, 1804. Okay, so when we look at the Plebiscite, oh, sorry, I've misspelled Plebiscite. Okay, so what Napoleon did, okay, and this is really interesting here, that you see that this was to create the French Empire. So basically, he had about 7 million voters were called to participate. You got 47% voter turnout and 99% voting to approve the Constitution. Okay, so now it says here the officially announced result. You can think of that as you want. Was it a fair election? Do we really have 3.5 million people voting one way and 2,000, 2,500 voting the other? Who knows? But at the same time, we can get from this that obviously Napoleon is pretty popular, right? So basically, 1804, Napoleon, so if the French Empire is established, by a plebiscite. Okay, now a plebiscite is basically a national referendum. Okay, so French Empire is established and Napoleon is proclaimed Emperor of France. Okay, so with that, we see in 1804, we see Napoleon is proclaimed as the Emperor of France. All right, so from there, we want to think about the Napoleonic Code. Okay, so the Napoleonic Code gives France a uniform code of laws for the first time. Okay, so we want to note here that this does, and again, this gives us equal justice under the law, and it has some conservative elements. But the idea, here's the thing: when people call Napoleon like a dictator and that sort of thing, what we have to understand is that the Napoleonic Code says that France is a nation of laws, that that there are laws here, that it's not just an arbitrary kind of thing here. So just to note that. So going from there, we see the Napoleonic Code, and then from there we also want to note a few things. Now, Napoleon as a military leader is not necessarily going to be the most important thing. Okay, so the Continental System. Okay, so when we go into the Continental System, this was going on during the Napoleonic Wars. And another thing we might want to note, since we're putting together a timeline here, so when we think about the Napoleonic Wars, now France was actually at peace until 18. So we see here the wars are categorized into 5 conflicts. Okay, so each termed after the coalition. So the War of the Third Coalition in 1805, the Fourth Coalition in 1806 and 1807. The fifth, 1809, and then the sixth, 1813 to 14, and then finally the seventh coalition at Waterloo. Okay, so going from there, if we look at the Continental System, okay, this is something that went into effect. Okay, so this was in 1806. Now, notice here that this is basically about the time of the Fourth Coalition. Okay, so what we're going to note here is 1806. That Napoleon announces the Continental System, okay, which was a trade, basically a trade embargo against Britain. Okay, so a trade embargo against the British, designed to weaken Britain economically. Okay, so designed to weaken Britain economically, since Napoleon did not have sufficient naval forces to invade. Okay, so to invade Britain. Okay, so he didn't have the necessary forces to invade the British Isles, so the Continental System. Okay, now when we look at what's going on here, when we go to the Napoleonic Wars, we see here the Sixth Coalition in 1813. So if we look at the War of the Sixth Coalition, this was basically after the invasion of Russia. Okay, so we want to note here that the invasion of Russia, okay, it occurs because, okay, so 1812, Napoleon invades Russia, after Russia resumed trade with Britain. Okay, so basically, so his army, his grand army, let's see, I don't know if I've never been very good with French. Okay, his grand army, I don't know if I even spelled that right, but let's see. Okay. Hey, yeah, I just didn't put an accent there, but yeah, we're good. So the Grand Army, basically, his Grand Army was, was basically, just put down to nothing. Okay, so was obliterated. Was obliterated, during this invasion. During this disastrous invasion. Okay, so we're going to say here that this is basically what you're going to see as a result of the invasion of Russia. This is going to bring about the War of the Sixth Coalition. We don't have to get into the wars of every coalition. Okay, that is disastrous invasion prompting the War of the Sixth Coalition. Okay, so the War of the Sixth Coalition, and so we look at then 1814. Okay, so after Napoleon was defeated, okay, at at Leipzig. So basically, and you don't need to necessarily mention the name of the battle, right? So was defeated by coalition forces, right? So coalition forces. He abdicated and was exiled to Elba. Okay, so Elba is off the coast of Italy. All right, so I don't know if Italo's still here, but yes, Elba is off the coast of Italy, and so going into this, he spends his first exile in Elba, and then we have the 100 days. Okay, so when we look at the 100 days of Napoleon, we've got this here. The 100 days mark the period between Napoleon's return. So this was 1815, so March and July. Okay, so basically 1815, Napoleon escapes from Elba. Okay, so from Elba and returns. Let's see. Okay, escaped from Elba and returned to France for the 100 days. Okay, so return to France for the 100 days. And of course, we see here that, return to France, and then 1815, he is defeated, so Napoleon defeated by, at Waterloo, by the forces of the Seventh Coalition. Okay, so basically exiled to St. Helena, a British island in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Okay, so so we're going to note here, now in particular the middle of the South Atlantic. So it's not even North Atlantic. It's not even anywhere close. And then in 1821, we note, 1821, Napoleon died on St. Helena. Okay, so which he had stomach ulcers. The rumors of him being poisoned have never been substantiated. Okay, so suspicions of him being poisoned were not, were never substantiated. Okay, his autopsy revealed that he had died of some, stomach ulcers and stuff like that. So the tomb of Napoleon. Okay, one thing to note here, which is I've seen this before, and it was really, really amazing. Okay, so the tomb of Napoleon, which was a really amazing experience. We've got shocked. Oh my goodness, that is great. Somebody's calling themselves Shocked Frederick the Great. Okay, so as far as that, we see the tomb of Napoleon. Oh, okay, that's an official site. Let me just run in here real quick. Oh, you see that? That's my video. I made that video a couple years ago. So if you want to take a look at the tomb of Napoleon, I made that a few years ago. So basically, Napoleon was brought back to France in 1840. Okay, so he was buried on St. Helena, but he wasn't brought back to France until 1840. So basically, the British allowed Napoleon's remains to be returned to France for proper burial. Okay, so a tomb was built and under a church in Paris. Okay, you know, in a, you know, under a church in Paris. Okay, a tomb was built for him under a church in Paris, and his grave, you know, his tomb, you know, his tomb, the casket sits in full view with no name on it. Okay, so basically with no name on it. Now, so the thing is, part of the reason for that is because I think they couldn't decide, do we call him Napoleon Bonaparte or do we call him Napoleon? Do we call him the emperor or do we, you know, call him something else here? So as far as that, you know, is that Joe who? Fabulous. Joe who? Who's Joe? All right, so so as far as that goes, I think you know, I've answered some questions. Do y'all want me to get into? Do y'all want me to play my song about Napoleon? Do y'all want? Let's see. So let me go ahead and just get into this. I'm going to put a poll out there, and let's see here. So you know, should I sing the song I wrote about Napoleon? Oh, Joe Mama, ha 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 ha. All right, so let's see if people want to hear my song. I put a poll in the crowdcast. Do y'all want? Yeah, somebody pressed F to pay respects. I think that's very classy of y'all. So we've got some people that want to hear the song. So let me go ahead and grab my guitar, and we will. Yeah, let's why not, right? Let's do a little singing time. And then we can read this new book I've got. I've got to find a guitar pick. Give me just a second. Okay, I found a pick here. All right, so let's go ahead and have a little singing time. And all right, so people want to hear the song, I think. Okay, so let's see here. Let me see where my lyrics are. Okay, so let's see. Okay, song lyrics are right here. I hadn't sang it in a little while, so you know, just make sure I've got it. I'm gonna have to scroll once in a while. Okay, so y'all just forgive me for having to scroll now and then, just to kind of see what we've got here. All right, so I may have to pause once in a while. I don't necessarily have this whole thing memorized, but it sounds like y'all want to hear it. Only 2 people don't want to hear it. All right, whoever voted no will be sent to Helena, or maybe we'll send them to St. Helena. Right? Okay. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, next week I'll do the Metternich rap. We'll do a little live rendition there. Okay. So as far as that goes, let's go ahead and let's see. All right, there we go. So let's go in here and we will, yeah, let's go ahead and do a little singing here. The year was 1812 and the French emperor said that Russia couldn't trade with the British anymore. The military genius leading 500,000 men. The Grand Army can't do anything but win. Napoleon, the French Revolution brought you to your throne. The Continental System trade with Britain must cease. It's the only way Europe will ever know peace. Will we ever know peace? Coming back from Russia, not as many as before. The French Grand Army ain't so grand anymore. All right, just got to scroll. Excuse me for just a second. Watch Moscow burn with the fires of hell in our retreat. It didn't go so well. Napoleon, he wanted Borodino, but he couldn't win the war. Time to raise a new army with esprit de corps, cause the 6th coalition's coming back for more. Yeah, they're coming back for more. Oops. Lost the battle of the nations against Europe's armies, just like Leonidas fell to Persians at Thermopylae. Wanted to keep fighting, but then after a debate, the French generals all decided it was time to abdicate. Napoleon, they exiled him to Elba, but he was escape prone. For 100 days he was back on the throne, but Wellington defeated him and now he's gone. Oh, and now he's gone. All right. Looking at the stars and they're shining so bright. The sky above St. Helena, so pretty at night. But in the South Atlantic, something doesn't feel right. Not a war, not a battle, not a triumph in sight. Middle of nowhere, not exactly paradise. The English governor doesn't treat me very nice. Stomach ulcer, loneliness, I'm in such strife. Just 6 more years till the end of my life. Press F to pay respects. All right, this is where y'all seriously like press F to pay respects. Okay, so press F. Everybody play press F. All right, thank y'all so much. Sounds like y'all are liking this. It's time to play it when you fail the exam. Everybody's pressing F. Okay, it's time to let the do the finale here. Okay. In 1840, they brought you home, built an unmarked tomb beneath a classical dome. Now you're guarded by a dozen angels made of stone, and on the 17th of June, you are not alone. No, you are not alone. Napoleon, the French Revolution brought you to your throne. Those rumors about your height, they were overblown. Make your mark on history so you'll never be gone. Oh, no, you'll never be gone. No, you'll never be gone. All right, so that's my Napoleon song. I still need to get some more. Now, if you want to hear the song, the recorded version, I've got it on my SoundCloud. Just go to SoundCloud, search for Tom Ritchie, and you can hear that song. So let's take a few more questions. Okay, so when we think about this, how did Napoleon affect relationships between France and other European countries? I would say not so good. Not so good. Now, as far as the Napoleonic Wars, we want to keep that in mind that we're not going to get too deep into those, okay? But yeah, I would say by and large, not so good. Now, one thing that you could say is a lasting legacy of Napoleon is Napoleon got rid of the Holy Roman Empire, which, of course, remember Voltaire said was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire. But Napoleon abolished the Holy Roman Empire. So that's something that's kind of a lasting impact of Napoleon, that's just gotten rid of. And so how did Napoleon spread nationalism? Now, you could say that somewhat directly, somewhat indirectly. One thing we might do, I don't know if, I don't know if any of Miss Lawrence's students are here from Ocean Lakes High School in Virginia Beach, but we could get into, I think the 3rd of May, if I'm not, yeah, the 3rd of May, 1808. So Napoleon's invasion of Spain was something where you see that Goya, who was a Spanish artist, you see the nationalism here, where you see Napoleonic soldiers firing upon, well, okay, we did see it. Okay, so let me see. This is probably bringing up something that was like, oh gosh, it was trying to bring up something that was like, wow. Okay, so we're just going to go with the 1280 by 989. This is a little extra. Okay, but you see here, where, okay, so we can see where you've got the French firing squad here. You've got these Spanish guerrillas, and we see here, which this is actually where the term guerrilla, little war, comes from, that the Spanish guerrillas, they were not they were not regular army soldiers. So we see here that these guerrilla, guerrillas are being executed. So these guerrilla warriors are being executed. And so you see here where certainly this has a hand, I think, in bringing about Spanish nationalism. Now, there are some other things here. Yeah, so Goya is definitely somebody that you would want to be familiar with. Okay, so as far as that goes, let's see, 18. So Duke and the Prince of Peace. Okay, so but you can see here, yeah, here's another one. I think I stopped screen sharing for some reason. Was I ever screen sharing? That's a good question, isn't it? Okay, so as far as that goes, yeah, was I ever screen sharing? I don't know. Okay, so as far as that goes, we're going to just look over here at Goya's work. So the 3rd of May, okay, the 3rd of May, where you see the French firing squad firing on the Spanish guerrillas. Okay, and then we see here the Duke, the Duke of Alcudia, the Prince of Peace. Now, he was the Prime Minister of Spain. So you see where Goya is glorifying the Prime Minister of Spain, calling him the Prince of Peace. Okay, so this really, you can see this nationalism in Goya's work. Okay, so that's something that I think is an important feature to kind of note here, that when we look at Francisco Goya, that we look at his never says nationalism, but you can definitely see where there is some Spanish nationalism in his work. So as far as that goes, that would be something that when you think about like nationalism outside of France, the response. Now, also Russian nationalism. I read when I was like 22, I read War and Peace just to say that I did. And so War and Peace, like, what you see at the beginning of War and Peace, that before the Napoleonic Wars, the Russian elite spoke French. It was like a sign of your culture to show, that you were cultured and educated to speak French. Now, it's kind of like when you think about the 100 Years' War, where the English elite start speaking English rather than French. And so you see a surge in Russian nationalism because of Napoleon and his invasion of Russia. So that's something that that we're seeing there. All right. So going from there, we want to we've got that. So did Napoleon? Okay, and Ava, this is the question, isn't it? Now, Ava, I'm going to put this question back to you. Thank you, Victoria, for Victoria has followed me here. She was watching on YouTube. So Victoria had followed me on Instagram. If anybody follows me on Instagram in the next little bit, I'll go ahead and give you a shout out. I tell you, these new TikToks with the savage tiger. What is it? Tiger King? Is that the? I haven't seen that show yet, but this is like really, really funny. Crazy Maya's got a new TikTok. So let me actually put that on my Instagram story. It's pretty hilarious. All right, so let me just note that. But this is a really funny TikTok. Okay. So we see here, crazy Maya doing her TikTok there. I think I'm going to share that on my Instagram story. It's just really funny. Like, it's got that whole Tiger King thing. Okay. Oh my Lord. Okay, so that's an interesting new TikTok trend there. All right, so going with that, let's see. I thought when I read this, I thought I saw the rule of 2, Ava. I thought we were getting into Star Wars. We've got Swan for Lions, Hayden Crump, Isabella, and Sir Samuelis. All right, thank y'all so much for the follows. So, Ava, what you have to decide, first of all, what were the ideals of the French Revolution? What does the French Revolution mean to you? And it can mean all kinds of things. The French Revolution was a freaking mess, all right? The French Revolution can mean all kinds of things. But for you, what gives the French Revolution meaning? And depending on the primary value here, yeah, the Carol Baskin killed her husband. This is just really, really funny. I mean, I just could keep watching this over and over again. Carol Baskin. So it's the newest TikTok. It didn't happen. Oh my goodness, that's so funny. All right, but with that, yeah, so what you've got to think about is that's a matter of interpretation. It can be answered a variety of different ways, but what you've got to do here is that, you've got to decide what was the French Revolution about. Okay. Thank you very much, Aubrey. That is great. Can we get the chords? It's a pretty simple song with the Napoleon thing, but I'll think about putting that out there. Okay. So would we categorize him as a liberal, conservative, or something in between? Okay, Yvonne, that's the other thing. I can't tell you how to interpret history. I can tell you here are some things about Napoleon, and you decide whether he's liberal, conservative, nationalist. Now, some of these are more arguable than others. It'd be very difficult to argue that Napoleon was not a nationalist, for example. And then you think about, like, what was the French Revolution about? What if y'all were going to answer here? Okay, tell me as far as that goes. Let's go ahead and tell me in the chat, what was the French Revolution about to you? Pick two things. Pick two things. Okay, so is this is this just a TikTok trend, or did somebody do I mean, this is just so funny. Okay, so with that, yeah, so I still need to watch this Tiger King. All right, so what do we have here? What do we see here about the French Revolution? What are we going to say about it? Okay, what are we going to say about the French Revolution? Marie Antoinette making her hair into a boat and telling the peasants to eat cake. Mark, that is wonderful. I think that's hilarious. Okay. So the French Revolution was about Marie Antoinette making her hair into a boat and telling the peasants to eat cake. So liberty and enlightenment, nationalism and liberalism, the rights of men, overthrowing absolutism. These are all valid. Okay. And there is Victoria, who's come from YouTube to here and now on Instagram. She's just everywhere. All right. So as far as that goes, nationalism and liberalism we see here. So if we're going, what I would do here is I would think about the two most important values. And then you look at Napoleon. So liberalism, Hayden using his alt caps, okay? Violence and nationalism, okay? So that's something that I think could be something that is extremely important here, okay? So it's how you define the French Revolution is going to determine how you view Napoleon. And remember that history is about interpreting. So here's the thing. What would y'all say just if I asked y'all? So did Napoleon, so I'm going to say here, Napoleon upheld the ideals of the French Revolution. Okay. So let's say here, strongly agree, somewhat disagree, and strongly disagree. Let's see where y'all stand on this, okay? And of course, you need evidence in a DBQ, but y'all can do that in the DBQ that I shared with y'all, okay? So Napoleon upheld the ideals of the French Revolution, okay? So let's get some more voters in here. All right, so we've got, now here's the thing that's interesting, that it's very difficult to make a strong judgment, right? That, we're either, it seems to be that people are somewhat agreeing, somewhat disagreeing. And so when we consider that, when we think about in terms of, that, a lot of you are going to say, in this respect, he upheld them. In that respect, he didn't. Now, the thing is, I don't like neutral options because you need to go one way or the other, okay? Now, you don't have to go all the way. Complex understanding, let's think about this. Complex understanding is about having a viewpoint, but also acknowledging the other side. So we see here that the majority of you are saying somewhat agree. Now, this is about the same numbers as people who agree with the coronavirus lockdowns. That's very interesting. So we see about 70% here. So going into this is very interesting to see how y'all are looking into this. And very few people with strong opinions here. Most of y'all are understanding the nuance, okay? So going from there, ladies and gentlemen, a lot of y'all are starting to to ask interpretive questions. Strawberry, I think we've already gone into religion. Remember that the Concordat reestablished the Catholic Church as the majority religion. Remember, guaranteeing religious toleration for all people in France. So that's something that did he bring? Had to affect religion. He brought back the Catholic Church, kind of, right? Okay, so with that, ladies and gentlemen, we've been here for a little while. Now, keep an eye open for an email from me, because I'm going to set up a couple premium sessions that are going to happen this Saturday. Okay, so on Saturday, we're going to set up some premium sessions, and you'll want to be present for those. So keep in mind, just stay open. Oh, Potato King book. That's right. That's right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mark. So I got this book from Amazon. I saw this book, and it's called The Potato King. All right. And so let's just read this book here. The Potato King. All right. I need to start writing books like this. Okay. Because this is just really amazing. I haven't even read it yet, and I can already tell it's amazing. There was once a king called Fritz. One day he heard about a new wonder plant from South America, the potato. He planted a big field in a nearby village, and he spoke to his citizens. Here, here, I give you the potato. It costs little to grow and is healthy to boot. The people, however, didn't like to be told what to eat. I mean, what is Frederick also closing their neighborhood pool? King Fritz was upset, but he had an idea. These pages are stuck together. He ordered his soldiers to march to the village. All right, that's Frederick the Great. That's some enlightened absolutism there. Oh my Lord, there's still. Oh, this is amazing. This is like the best book ever. I don't know if I've ever seen a better book. And guard the potato field. Okay, so his soldiers have now he had an idea. They're guarding the potato field. Thought the villagers. If a vegetable has to be so closely guarded, there must be something special about it. Oh my Lord, this is the best book I've ever read. The king had ordered the guards to go easy on their watch at night. I wonder if this is actually true. This is crazy. Baiting the locals to steal the crop for their own gardens. Wow. The potato flourished and has lived on as a key ingredient in local kitchens ever since. Okay, that is like, wow. Okay, so did he really do that? Wow, that is yeah, so this story may be a myth. Okay, so it says this story may be a myth, but to this day, people honor King Fritz by putting potatoes on his grave. So if you ever visit the grave of Frederick the Great, then you should put potatoes on top of it. Yeah, exactly. Count of Monte Cristo who? Wow, this is, okay, 6 stars. I mean, this is an amazing book. The Potato King. That is just wow. Wow. Okay, so that is, yeah, so don't press F to pay respects at Frederick's grave. Press P to pay respects, okay? Press P to pay respects for potato. Any of y'all seen Lord of the Rings? All right, so with that, we'll go ahead and cut off this broadcast. I'll be back on Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern for another Corona class, and I'll also be doing some free and premium broadcasts over the weekend. Premium. I wonder what premium is. That like me and my bros, or something like that. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank y'all for another wonderful Corona class. And I will be back, of course, on Monday at 1 o'clock to talk about the conservative order. If you want to go over that DBQ on Napoleon, again, stay tuned. I'm going to be sending out information for a premium session where we're going to go over that. So y'all keep that in mind, and we will be in touch. It's always a pleasure.